The kingdom of Silverwood was famed for two things: the endless green of its ancient forests and the unforgiving sharpness of its winter winds. In a modest, sun-dappled house near the king's castle lived a miller named Heinrich, a man whose ambition greatly outstripped his station. Heinrich was prone to grand, careless boasts, believing that speaking a falsehood with enough conviction could somehow transform it into truth. He had a daughter, Greta, who possessed a quiet grace and industrious spirit, but who lived permanently in the shadow of her father's loud exaggerations. One blustery autumn day, while presenting the king with a meager harvest of grain, Heinrich let loose his most reckless claim yet. "Your Majesty, King Leopold," Heinrich declared, swelling his chest with false pride, "my daughter Greta is blessed with a singular gift, skill unmatched in all the lands." King Leopold, a sovereign known for his stern eye and insatiable appetite for wealth, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And what might this singular gift be, miller?" the king inquired, his voice dry as parchment. "Sire," Heinrich proclaimed, gesturing wildly, "she can spin straw-mere chaff and husk into the finest, purest gold." The words hung in the great hall like a curse, instantly erasing the laughter and substituting a heavy, expectant silence. King Leopold considered the miller for a long, terrible moment, a calculating glint entering his eyes. Gold was the language all kings understood. Indeed, the king finally replied, a chilling smile touching his lips. "If what you say is true, your daughter shall be richly rewarded. If it is a lie, you both shall pay the highest price for wasting my time." The very next morning, Greta was seized and dragged from her home, her terrified father left behind, weeping and useless. She was ushered through the towering gates of the castle and taken not to a place of honor, but to the highest turret room. The room was vast and desolate, piled floor to ceiling with bales of dried yellow straw, enough to fill a dozen barns. A spinning wheel stood mockingly in the center, and a single small window offered a view only of the unforgiving forest. "There is the straw," King Leopold announced, locking the heavy iron-bound door behind him. "And there is your task. By dawn, if this room is not filled with spun gold, you shall be executed for your father's treason." Greta collapsed onto the cold stone floor, the reality of her father's lie crushing her hope and breath. Yes, she was only a simple girl who knew thread and linen, not alchemy. She wept inconsolably, the sheer volume of the straw mocking her tears, until the thick shadows of evening began to fill the room. As the moon rose, casting a sliver of weak light onto the spinning wheel, the door clicked open, though no one stood there. A strange, small figure hopped into the room. He was a creature of curious contrasts, ancient and spry, with fiery eyes and a laugh like the crunch of dry leaves. He wore a patched tunic and high, pointed shoes, and carried an air of potent, mischievous magic. "Good evening, miller's daughter," the little man chirped, circling her with unsettling curiosity. "Why do you weep so bitterly?" Greta, though terrified, explained her impossible predicament, pointing to the mountain of straw that sealed her fate. The little man grinned, showing teeth that were sharp and slightly too numerous. "Ah, a trifling matter. I can spin the straw into gold for you." Hope flared in Greta's chest, momentarily overcoming her fear of the bizarre creature. "What do you ask in return?" "Ow," she whispered. The imp pondered, then pointed to a thin silver chain she wore around her neck, a simple keepsake from her mother. "That necklace," he declared. "Give it to me, and the gold is yours." Desperate to live, Greta agreed immediately, unclasped the chain, and surrendered it to him. The little man sat down at the spinning wheel, and with a blur of motion, the straw flew onto the spindle, transforming instantly into thick, brilliant coils of purest gold thread. He worked all night without rest, humming a tuneless, hypnotic melody, and by the first ray of dawn, the room was truly filled with glittering gold.
Ow.
The imp vanished, just as the key scraped in the lock. King Leopold entered and gasped, his eyes reflecting the blinding yellow treasure. His initial astonishment quickly morphed into a profound, terrifying greed. He realized the sheer, unlimited potential of this new resource. He led Greta to a second, even larger tower chamber. This room was piled higher than the first with straw, reaching almost to the rafters. "You have done well, maiden," the king said, his voice husky with avarice. "But this chamber is twice the size. Spin this by dawn, and you shall be my queen." Greta was heartbroken. She had hoped to be freed, but instead she was trapped by a lie, compounded by a king's insatiable hunger. Her despair returned tenfold, and just as before, the little man appeared in the twilight. "A more considerable task this time, I see," he observed, tapping his long pointed finger against his chin. "What treasure do you offer me now?" Greta had nothing left of personal value but a jeweled ring her fiancé had given her. It was a painful sacrifice, but a necessary one. She gave him the ring. We spun the second greater pile of straw, and by morning, the new chamber also shone with gold. The king, overcome with his triumph, honored his word. He took Greta to the third final chamber, a royal hall filled with a colossal, impossible mountain of straw. "Spin this," King Leopold commanded, "and tomorrow you will be crowned my queen." Greta knew the little man would appear, but now she had nothing left to offer. The ring was gone, the necklace was gone. When he appeared, his fiery eyes sparkling with a new dark kind of anticipation, sensing her vulnerability. "I have nothing left to give," she confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Name your price, I beg you." The imp leaned close, his breath smelling faintly of ash and smoke. "Then promise me the first child you bear when you are queen." The future was distant, the present threat, immediate and mortal. Thinking she could somehow renege on the deal, or that the king might never marry her, Greta stammered, "I promise." The imp gave a sharp, satisfied cackle and set to work. The straw was spun, the king was satisfied, and the next day, Greta became Queen Greta of Silverwood. Life as queen was strange. The luxury of the castle was cold, and her husband, King Leopold, cared more for the new gold than for her heart. The memory of the little man and the terrible promise was like a shadow at the edge of her vision, easily ignored in the bustle of court life. Years passed and the crown grew less heavy. The promise seemed distant, a nightmare from a past life. Then, Greta gave birth to a son, a healthy boy with a cry that filled the halls with joy.
Ow.
They named him Prince Alaric. The queen finally felt genuine happiness, a true warmth that the gold in the treasury could never provide. It was precisely at this moment of pure, unguarded bliss that the floorboards of the nursery creaked. The little man appeared again, standing beside the cradle, his fiery eyes fixed on the sleeping infant. He hadn't aged, nor had his clothes changed. He was exactly as she remembered him, sharp and hungry. "I have come for what you promised me," he announced, his voice a low, chilling whisper that brought the queen's blood to ice. Queen Greta screamed, clutching the cradle and desperately trying to deny the horrifying reality of the 3-year-old bargain. "I will give you all the gold in the treasury," she pleaded, pointing toward the walls lined with the gold he himself had spun. "Take it and leave my son." The imp merely shook his head, a gesture of profound disinterest. "A promise is worth more than all the gold in the world, Queen, especially a desperate one." He moved toward the child, and Greta threw herself onto her knees, begging for mercy, her crown askew, her dignity forgotten. The little man paused, his eyes gleaming with malicious amusement at her terror. He had extracted the price of her fear many times over. Perhaps he conceded, tapping his foot. "I can offer you a final simple challenge. One last chance to save your prince." "Anything," Greta cried, tears of relief and dread mixing on her cheeks. "You have 3 days," the imp declared, holding up 3 fingers. "If you can guess my name, my true, hidden name, you may keep the boy. If you fail," he added, a cruel smile widening his mouth, "the prince belongs to me, and you will never see him again." With a final, echoing cackle that seemed to vibrate in the very timbers of the nursery, the imp disappeared once more. The first day was a failure born of panic. Greta spent hours compiling every odd or foreign name she had ever heard. The royal archives were consulted, the court registers were scoured, and the names of ancient spirits and tricksters were whispered. Names like Klabotterman, Nixie, Kobold, and Walther were shouted out to the empty room. When the imp reappeared at sundown, he listened to her list, then merely shook his head, tapping his pointed shoe on the stone floor in time to her failures. "Wrong, wrong, wrong," he chanted, and then vanished, leaving Greta devastated. The second day, Greta sent her most loyal and resourceful servant, an old groundskeeper named Klaus, into the deep forest. "Go where the king's path never treads," she instructed Klaus. "Go where the shadows are thickest. The oldest legends still breathe." Klaus rode out, obedient and desperate to help his queen. He spent the entire day searching near abandoned wells, ancient standing stones, and deep forgotten glens. Meanwhile, Greta continued her desperate guessing game. She tried names from the common folk, Bauer, Schultz, Meyer, names that were simple, hoping the imp was merely being deceptive. The imp returned and mocked her efforts with increasing glee, twirling faster with each incorrect guess. "Your time is dwindling, Queen," he hissed, his fiery eyes alight with triumph. "Tomorrow night, I claim the firstborn of Silverwood." Greta was reduced to a shell of her former self, haggard and worn, pacing the nursery floor as the sun set on the final third day. Suddenly, the chamber door opened, and Klaus stumbled in, covered in mud and burrs, his face a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. "My queen, I have heard it," he gasped, steadying himself on the doorframe. "I found a hidden place deep within the black wood, a small hut." Klaus recounted how he had hidden among the roots of an ancient oak tree, watching the little man dance wildly around a tiny, flickering fire. The little man, Klaus swore, had been singing a joyful, self-congratulatory song, utterly convinced of his victory. The servant paused, leaning in conspiratorially, his voice dropping to a whisper. He sang, "Today I bake, tomorrow I brew, soon the queen's dear child I'll seize. My secret joy no one can see, that Rumpelstiltskin is my name." Greta felt a wave of coldness, then a burst of blinding, exhilarating energy. The answer was hers. The hidden name. She waited, calmly bathing her son, preparing his cradle, adopting a look of profound, defeated resignation. As the midnight bell chimed, the little man appeared for the final time, his confidence radiating like heat from a forge. "Well, Queen," he sneered, crossing his arms, "have you failed already? Let us hear your final attempts before I take the boy." Greta spoke slowly, carefully. "Is your name perhaps Stiefel? Or perhaps Glockner?" The imp shook his head, his excitement building, already reaching for the child. "Wrong. Your time is done." Greta straightened, her eyes meeting his fiery gaze without flinching. She spoke the name clearly, with the full force of a mother's conviction. "Is it possible?" Queen Greta asked, a faint, chilling smile gracing her lips, "that your name is Rumpelstiltskin?" The little man's face went from triumph to utter terrible shock. He let out a shriek that echoed through the castle, a sound of pure, magical unraveling. In his impossible, overwhelming rage at having his secret, his greatest power revealed, the imp stamped his foot so hard that he tore a hole in the stone floor. The spoken name, the identity that gave him power, had been stripped away. And in his uncontrolled fury, he destroyed himself, vanishing in a final furious puff of smoke and ruin. Thus the queen and her child were saved, proving that the most desperate promises can be undone, and that the greatest magic often lies not in gold, but in the truth of a single spoken word. Comment, like, share, and subscribe to Storycraft Studio.